The moment a body is found, the clock starts ticking. 48 hours before the trail goes cold. From A&E and Crime House, this is the official podcast from the famous true crime series, The First 48. I'm Carter Roy. Every Thursday, I revisit a landmark homicide investigation in depth with long-form storytelling built for your ears. Listen to and follow The First 48 on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we hear from the defense experts in the Lindsay Clancy trial. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my active member of the Catholic Church co-host, Alice.
Those of you who are mad about that, that's not the most offensive Catholic comment today. Because I will say the prosecution took it away today.
Yeah, they sure did.
Oh, my, look at that.
Did.
I even got a kneeler in here.
There you go. Look at that. I mean, you better not ever be a witness in a murder trial. They'll start questioning you about your religious beliefs.
If only Lindsay had a kneeler in her house, maybe
go.
we wouldn't be here. But
it's like we're back in the 1600s in Massachusetts. It's Massachusetts. We should have moved the trial to Salem for a jury.
Good
maybe,
Lord.
Maybe we could have gotten to the bottom
today
of this.
was a day.
Today was a day.
I just thought, it's time to sit down sometimes, prosecution, because you just keep shooting yourself in the foot. You know what I say to my kids all the time? Do nothing is better. Do nothing.
Yeah, well, do no harm is not just a rule in medicine. It's a rule in the law, too. And it is really important when you're doing cross-examination to know what not to do and who not to cross in a really aggressive manner. And as we're going to see today, this group of prosecutors did not learn that.
They
lesson.
lacked that. I will say it is something that when younger lawyers ask me, like, how do I develop that sense of the innate judgment? The real answer sometimes, I'm like, you know what? It comes with experience, but for some people, it never comes for other people. I'm not sure it's something that I can just say, if you practice for 20 years, you'll get it. There are people who just do not have that sense of judgment. And I do think that is the difference at the end of the day of like great lawyers who there's like a je ne sais quoi that I don't even think you can teach. And there were lapses of judgment today that I've been trying to put my finger on. Is it inexperience, or is it just one of those things where I don't know that you can teach?
And I don't know that you can teach judgment. The problem, I mean, we're way ahead of ourselves already. We're going to get to this and we're going to talk about it a lot. So I'm just going to stop talking about it for now. We're back with the Lindsay Clancy trial. We're in day 15. We're in the midst of the defense case. We're going to hear from a lot of expert witnesses today, which I have some takes on. I don't think the expert witness part maybe went as well for the defense as you might have expected, but the prosecution overshadowed any of that with some mistakes that we're going to talk about. And it started with a witness that you would think is one of those defense witnesses who gets called, they say what they got to say, the prosecutor stands up, and here's how you handle family members. If you're out there and you're prosecuting. If mama gets on the stand, or daddy, or sister, or whatever, you just ask, did you live with him at the house where he was selling drugs? No. Do you know what he was doing there? No. Do you love your son? Yes. No further questions, right? I mean, and that says to the jury, this person doesn't really know anything. They love their kid.
They're going to say anything.
Yeah.
Yep.
you don't tear them apart.
And you really do deal with them like same thing. You deal with them with kid gloves because they're not worth tearing up. Because like, what do you think mom is going to say? What do you think mother-in-law is going to say? They're gotta be on their team.
This is even worse because it would be one thing, you know, her mom testified yesterday and her sister testified yesterday, and they're her family. I don't think you should go after them, but you know, if you did, at least they're her family. This was the mother-in-law. This is Patrick's mother, who also, by the way, lost her 3 grandchildren and is only really tangentially even connected to any of this, had very little actual interaction with Lindsay other than recommending Nurse Paul, as we're going to see. But as the prosecution brings out on cross, didn't really have a super close relationship. Lindsay didn't let him keep the kids. Seems like maybe Lindsay, you know, didn't love her. I mean, she talked to her and stuff. I think they were friendly, but I don't think they were like best friends or anything like that. So really a witness that you would think the prosecution would have very little to do with. But as you're going to see, that's not what happened. So Sue Clancy is the first witness of the day. And this was Patrick's mom. She was a labor and delivery nurse for 30 years. And she said Lindsay was a great mom, that she loved her kids. And she'd actually met Lindsay when she was a student working at the same hospital as her. But around November, same story you've been hearing. She was starting to feel unwell. She was losing her appetite. She couldn't sleep, and she asked her for help. And that's when she reached out to South Shore Medical, as we've heard in the past. He said Lindsay was begging for help. And Reddington sort of goes through, you know, you had some text messages back and forth with her. You're being supportive, a relatively uneventful direct. This is not an important witness at all. Frankly, if the prosecution had asked no questions, I don't think that would have been inappropriate at all. But instead, the cross is much longer than the direct. And it does start off with their working together, that she started noticing those issues. It talks about how she actually went to the emergency room when Lindsay was at the emergency room. And this was something that I was confused about for a while, because some of you may remember it seemed like there was a contradiction where Lindsay said she went to the emergency room for suicidal ideation, but Patrick said she went because of insomnia. I think she went twice. I think the first time was insomnia, and that's this one, to South Shore. And then later on, I think she went to maybe MGH for the suicidal ideation. So I think she did both. And this is the one where she's having trouble sleeping. Notes that Lindsay drove herself. She was having heart palpitations, and the prosecution just cannot let go of this weed gummy thing, that she took a weed gummy, and that could have caused the heart palpitations. And I don't get it, but they brought it up again.
It's like their gotcha card of you knew nothing because you didn't know she took one gummy.
Yeah, you knew yeah, exactly.
It's like, it is the, you know nothing, Jon Snow. It's like one weed gummy.
What do you mean she's not taking illicit drugs? She took a weed gummy. We know that. Anyway, so go through the fact that she was prescribed trazodone and that she left in her own car. And look, fine. I mean, this stuff, fine. She's actually driving herself. It's serious, but not maybe as serious as people have made it out to be. She connected to Nurse Julie Paul.
Then Sue went on to say that she offered to help more with the kids, to help, you know, whatever Lindsay was going through. She said that she helped out at the Clancy home, but the kids never slept at her house, and she never stayed at Lindsay's house to help with the kids. And they went there with mother-in-law in the cross. They were like, the prosecution was like, were you aware that Lindsay told her therapist that she's not close to you and your husband, your in-laws, and she doesn't let you keep the kids? No. Sue Clancy didn't know that Lindsay said this. This is not great, right? I mean, I think this is a bad look from the jury perspective. And she says that they did have conversations with Lindsay about how she was feeling. And Lindsay told her that she thought she had a benzodiazepine dependency. And she says, Lindsay said, no one is hearing that or addressing it. Now, she also told her that she was never this depressed before, and it was brought on by the medication, which is kind of the story. Whether that's true or not, that's certainly the narrative that she is telling to multiple people. Now, she also recalls something that her husband testified about, that on Thanksgiving, they went to her daughter's house, and that they all went to her daughter's house and they spent Thanksgiving together, and that she told the grand jury that things were better at that point. But now she's saying that's when she noticed something was wrong. So there's an inconsistency with back during the grand jury. November, all things were good. But now she's saying that's when there was a turning point. And then the shooting in the foot of the prosecution. Not the only time. I would say, I don't know. Maybe they didn't look in the mirror that day. Maybe they have been in a war room, the two prosecutors together too much, and they haven't talked to people in the outside world for years, and they don't understand what questions won't land. But yes, if you watch the trial, you know what I'm talking about. Because the prosecution asks Sue Clancy, and I quote, "Are you an active member in the Catholic Church?" She says yes. And then the next follow-up question, "So you're aware that murder is considered a mortal sin?" Sidebar. No one even objects. The judge is like, shutting this down. Let's go sidebar, which is totally appropriate.
Yes. I thought it was interesting that Reddington didn't even get an objection out.
He couldn't. Did you see how fast it happened?
Sidebar.
The judge was like, I think the judge perked up when she said, "Are you an active member in the church?" Because there's not going to be a lot of follow-up questions that are going to be unobjectionable.
Now, recall, this is not the prosecution's first rodeo into Roman Catholicism.
No, it isn't.
And it's not the first time they've seen the judge's reaction when they start bringing up priests and religion. Remember, they wanted to see Father Bob's visitation records.
And visitation log.
And the judge was like, "You want to see the records of the priest?" And I was like, just say, "Of course we don't want to see the priest. We just want to know how often the doctor's been there. Of course we don't care about her talking to a priest." But they don't do that.
They don't.
They're like, "Well, you never know. He could be a witness. Could be important." And the judge is like, "I am not giving you the records of a Roman Catholic priest. It's not going to happen." So you would think his reaction then would tell you what his reaction is going to be to a completely irrelevant question.
Completely.
Just as a legal matter. There's no relevancy to her being Catholic or knowing that murder is a mortal sin. No relevancy at all. Particularly given that no one outside of the crazies is contesting that Lindsay did kill her kids. This is all about her mental state, which I'm not Catholic. Alice is.
Mental state matters as to whether it's a mortal sin.
Exactly.
100%.
So even if you wanted to get into a religious battle, you're going to lose it.
You're going to
lose the same grounds.
But also, I mean, okay, so here's the thing. I don't think that was her last question. It ended there. But
well, it wasn't.
I know it wasn't that.
So
this is such an offensive and objectionable question that this is like when the defense is like, it's going to be their last question. They don't even care. And they're like, mic drop it. And they're like, "And that's why you killed her, isn't it?" Objection. "I don't care, Judge. I'm sitting down." That's what true. This question is like, except they don't even know that because it's not their last question. And they actually meant to ask it as part of their outline. Okay, so for those of you who don't understand why we're so outraged, it's completely irrelevant. It has nothing to do with this case. Whether it is a mortal sin or not, she's not an expert. She's not Father Bob. It literally has no bearing on the legal elements of this case. And you have this like grandma who's lost her 3 children, who tried to help by introducing her to a nurse practitioner who she worked with, who they were hands-on, like, look, don't criticize all this family. All this family, they were trying to help. Okay, everyone was trying to take care of the kids. They were bringing over food. They were spending holidays together. Don't go after the grandma. Like, this is the wrong person to go after. And think about your jury. Your jury pool is coming from the same cultural pool as well. I bet you most of them have been to Mass. Most of them are probably at least culturally Catholic. At the very least, their neighbor is Catholic because of where we are in Duxbury, Massachusetts, right? A lot of Roman Catholics. It doesn't land with anybody. It looks abusive and it looks irrelevant and it makes you look like a bully.
It's just such a misstep. I mean,
such a misstep. And this is why I said that they not look in the mirror, because they practiced this. This was not a throwaway question. She had a lead up question to it. She was proud of this. This was her like Perry Mason moment. And someone who was like with her prepping was like, "That is a good question. Nailed it." You didn't nail it. So I don't know who they've been talking to or not talking to, but their judgment is completely off. And they deeply misstepped early on in today's testimony.
And it's one of those things where we've talked about how misguided, unclear lacking direction, lacking clarity the prosecution's case has been. And it's just yet another nail in that coffin. And look, you can win a case if the jury hates you. You can, because the jury is going to try and put aside all that stuff. They're going to try and decide it on the evidence in the law. But those 12 people are human. And if they really don't like you and it's close, even if they don't realize it, it could be one of those things that pushes them in the other direction. I mean, that absolutely could happen.
And this isn't even a religious fanaticism case. No one is alleging that this has to do with like religious fanaticism, which you may be able to see in some sort of like other type of case. And I did find it amazing because the judge has been so gun shy to do anything that's correct in this case in terms of like shutting down lines of questioning. He immediately said sidebar. And then, of course, when he came back, he told the jury to disregard the question completely and just to move on, which is appropriate. But that's how offensive it was, as he even knew. He's like, we got to shut this down.
And look, I can't wait. I hope they release the transcripts of the sidebars eventually.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine what he said to her. I tweeted that he probably told her, you ask a question like that again, you better brought a toothbrush because you're going to spend the night in jail. I mean, just a completely ridiculous question. But I do want to say this. It, I think, cleared up something that some of you have wondered if their heart's not really in this, if they don't really want to do this, they're being forced to do it. And that's why, no, they hate Lindsay Clancy. The prosecutors despise her. They think she absolutely is a cold-blooded murderer of her 3 kids. And they not only hate Lindsay Clancy, they hate Patrick and Patrick's family and Lindsay's family for sticking by her. Mm-hmm. And you can see, you've seen that from the very beginning, from the way they treated Patrick, from the way they treated all these family members, and coming to this point. Maybe you agree with them out there. Maybe you think that this family has betrayed those 3 kids and they're standing by a murderer and they deserve everything they get. Maybe you feel that way, but when you're in a courtroom in a case like this and you're trying to convince 12 jurors, you got to put that aside and you got to act professionally and you got to treat these people with a little bit of respect. And they don't know how to do that. This was just the ultimate example of that. It was awful. It was a terrible...
They let their emotions get in the way. Remember, we've said this before, how it's a relief to get to do this podcast because we're able to access parts of our emotion that we honestly have to shut away when we prosecute cases, because the victims actually are the ones who suffer if the prosecutor is way too emotionally invested in the case. They can't see things clearly. They're not keeping it purely strictly on the evidence. Their judgment is honestly clouded by emotion. And that's kind of what we saw in some of their cross-examinations today, because you'll know the prosecutors did great on the experts. I thought their cross-examinations were fantastic. They were organized and they asked the right questions and they got really good points across. It was these types of witnesses, the family members, the friends, where they lost their marbles and were completely off track for what the prosecution's job is.
And they started off on the wrong foot, and a lot of people noticed it and a lot of people didn't like it. They didn't like the way they questioned Patrick. They didn't like the way they treated him. But I think that's why. And, you know, the issue I have with this case, I just want to know whether or not this woman needs to go to prison for murdering her 3 children or not. That's all I want to know. You know, I mean, I'm not invested in what has now become like a quasi-political fight over this case and everybody trying to turn it into their own personal crusade on either side. I'm just not interested in any of that stuff. I just want to know if this woman was sane or not when she did this. And I would like a prosecution that is capable of putting on that case. And I just don't know that they are. And I feel like all of us are just having to sort of make our own way through this. And so is the jury. The evidence is coming in and the jury is having to make their own way through it without anybody guiding them or leading them or explaining anything to them or having a competent story or roadmap or bookcase, whatever you want to call it. And these 2 come in every day and they have some good moments and they're going to have some good moments later. But the reason this is so problematic, and then I'll stop harping on it, because people were like, oh, people who care more about one question, the fact Lindsay killed her 3 kids or whatever. No, Questions like this overshadow everything else.
Yes.
They make people forget the good points. They make people forget the evidence. They make people forget the subtle questions that got good things out. And this is what they remember. So that's why it's so problematic. Even if it weren't just also insulting and completely improper in a courtroom to be asking somebody that kind of question in this kind of case. It's just wild.
Insurance isn't one size fits all, and shopping for it shouldn't feel like squeezing into something that just doesn't fit. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they show you options that fit your budget. Enough hunting for discounts, trying to calculate rates, and tinkering with coverages.
Maybe you're picking out your very first policy, or maybe you're just looking for something that works better for you and your family. Either way, they make it simple to see your options. No guesswork, no surprises. Ready to see how easy and fun shopping for car insurance can be? Visit Progressive.com and give the Name Your Price tool a try. Take the stress out of shopping and find the coverage that fits your life on your terms. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Guys, do you love finding a good deal? One of my formative memories in life was going with my mom shopping. We would go to these outlet stores that had all these great products that you could buy for cheaper than you could ever imagine. And my mom was always looking for a good deal. And I grew up thinking that is a good thing. And you know what? It is. And now in the modern day, when you're looking for a deal, you should look to Whatnot. It is an app that focuses on community, on deals, on being a seller yourself, and enabling you to find all the great brands that you didn't realize had great deals. On Whatnot, you're connecting with sellers and other shoppers. It's like hanging with the group that gets you. This is a fun way to shop, and you almost never pay full price. You can shop name brands across makeup, perfume, clothes, handbags, jewelry, and more, all without the retail sticker shock. This is the best place to find great deals on the products you love.
Guys, I love shopping. I love a good deal, but I'm also really busy, so I don't really get the live shopping experience that I just crave until Whatnot. This is where shopping happens in real time with real people, real conversations, and these incredible deals. Okay, I like nice things, but let's be honest. I have lots of kids I have to feed, so I can't really afford to pay top price for it. I wanted this beautiful designer bag, and I thought, let me just check Whatnot for it. Not only was it on Whatnot for literally half of what it's going like right now on other sites, I got to watch the seller show me close up everything about the bag. I got to ask questions to a real person about the bag and its condition. I knew exactly what I was getting, and I was thrilled. Download Whatnot today and get $20 off your first purchase. Search Whatnot, WHATNOT, in the App Store, sign up, and start finding the best deals on the products you love with $20 off your first purchase.
Sleep Number's new collections are designed to adapt to the changing nature of your life and your sleep needs. Whether it's the personalized comfort of the Comfort Mode mattress, the targeted pressure relief of the Comfort Next mattress, or the Climate Collection that actively cools or warms to help you fall asleep and stay asleep.
And now, all beds are on sale during our biggest sale of the year. Save 25% on the new Comfort Next Luxe, plus free delivery on any mattress. Ends Monday, only at a Sleep Number store or sleepnumber.com.
They're not done. And the next few questions they ask are fine. Whether or not Lindsay was still taking the kids out in January. Patrick's going on various trips. He's taking Cora skiing. She's keeping the other kids. Just stuff to show that she was behaving normally. Then we have redirect. Reddington goes through the number of times that Lindsay was, quote unquote, turned away from various providers. And then we have recross, where we talk about the reason that she was turned away from women and infants. And finally, the prosecution explicitly said this, that she was turned away because the drugs were causing the problems. But the reason they believed the drugs were causing the problems is that was what was reported to them by Lindsay and Patrick, because that's what Lindsay and Patrick believed. So just because they turned them away for that reason doesn't mean they made some sort of independent investigation and determined that that was the cause. They're going on based on what they're told. Then we have redirect, where Reddington notes that nurse practitioner Gelada, I think she was a nurse practitioner, never called women and infants back, which we already know. He's brought that up before. So that's the end of that witness. At this point, the jury leaves and we have some arguments. We have Dr. La Posada, who's going to testify today by Zoom, what one might call television, if you were so inclined, which I thought was quite ironic.
But how will they hug her?
Yes. She won't be able to give anyone a hug. How will you tell what her feet are doing while she's giving her expert testimony? So we have some objections to some exhibits. One of them, the drawing is inaccurate. The window well's in the wrong place. Where they have her landing would have been in the window well. And so we argue about that for a little while. The defense says, look, the point is to show how she fell, not necessarily exactly where she landed. The window well doesn't really matter. Some of these exhibits come in, some don't. And then the television breaks. So we don't have Dr. La Posada at this point because we can't figure out the technology. Reddington was right all along. If he just had her there, instead of doing this Zoom, this newfangled Zoom
I missed
thing.
this. Did they say why? Was it just because of expense?
They just get, I don't know why she didn't come. I doubt it was.
I'm surprised the judge allowed it, to be totally honest. But
no, I think the judge is up for anything. He may never allow it again after the circus that happened when they were trying to do this.
It was pretty terrible. The television did break.
But, Reddington, he's ready to move. He's limber for an old guy. So he's like, that's fine. I'll just call somebody else. And so he does.
And he's ready. You always do have to be ready. So he calls Dr. Donald Conde to the stand, and he is a child, adolescent, and adult clinical and forensic psychologist. He worked at the hospital affiliated with Harvard. Basically, his whole background is just to say Harvard as many times as possible to show how qualified he is. Lots of Harvard. So he knows a lot about medication, treating people with psychotic disorders. And he had worked in the State Institute, the Massachusetts Mental Health Center. And that's where he dealt with a lot of psychosis cases. In fact, he said, I was like half in psychosis. So he's like the expert here. Now it goes all the way back to him treating psychotic patients back to 1983. And he treated specifically women with postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. He's been a doctor for 43 years. And though he did not treat Lindsay Clancy, he reviewed her medical records from Tufts to Gelada and all the rest. Now, he talks about the Zoloft, how Zoloft can be helpful, but it can have side effects. And it would appear somewhat in the breast milk. So, in other words, Lindsay's concern about taking Zoloft while she was breastfeeding was a real concern. Now, he says, based on the records, she eventually does take Zoloft. But there are a series of rapid difficulties after they increased her dose. And he calls that activation. Then he goes through the reporting for Dr. Tufts, and now I understand, honestly, where Reddington's cross of Tufts came from, because it was really everything Conde said. And this is pretty typical. You get your experts because he may not know how to criticize Tufts, but you can see that everything he was criticizing about Tufts was in Reddington's cross-examination about these check boxes. For what it's worth, I was like, you're not making yourself look real hip, 43-year veteran doctor. He was like, there's all these, her notes are terrible. There are all these check boxes. I don't know anything. There's no narrative in here telling me what she actually saw. These are terrible notes. That's basically the gist of what he says about Dr. Tufts. And he also criticizes her prescribing. He says that antidepressants usually take 4 to 6 weeks for their useful effects, but side effects can happen more quickly. This is interesting because I think the prosecution agrees. And guess who didn't take any of these medications for even close to 4 weeks? Would, of course, be Lindsay. Now, he notes this, and it actually ends up being a little bit inaccurate, but he says that Tufts considered Zulresso, which is an infusion drug. And he mentioned that you don't have to be inpatient, but you have to be medically monitored the entire time. And it's wildly expensive. It's $34,000 to get this infusion. And that Lindsay didn't end up getting it because it was not actually recommended.
So then we get into psychosis and what it means. Means a lack of understanding of what is real and what is not. He talks about fixed false beliefs or delusions, something like told by God to do something. Auditory hallucinations are common. They're rarely visual hallucinations. Reddington asks if she had auditory hallucinations, and he asks this in a way that makes it sound like she had more than one, number one, and then she reported them earlier than the murders. And I actually saw a headline, because effective questioning, that literally said, doctor says Lindsay Clancy had auditory hallucinations, and it made it sound like this was something that was ongoing. And as we know, she's only described one of them as an auditory hallucination. They've sort of retconned some of her intrusive thoughts to maybe be auditory hallucinations, but certainly not, that's not the way she described it at the time. And look, this is what's interesting about these witnesses, because when he talks about psychosis, it sounds different from what Lindsay was experiencing. Now, obviously, she says that she had a psychotic event the day of. And if she literally heard a command voice telling her to kill the kids, then I think that would qualify. But nothing that leads up to that fits in with that. You don't see the sort of fixed false beliefs type thing. You don't really see the delusions. She seems to have a very good idea of what's going on with her. She seems to have a pretty good idea of her symptoms. And I think a lot of people, it's just interesting to watch people watch this case, because a lot of people thought that the defense case today actually hurt them for reasons like this, because they're hearing this and they're saying, that doesn't sound like Lindsay. Now, later on, you are going to have a witness who's basically going to say that someone can be psychotic and you have no idea whatsoever, but his description of it seems different. And it's just, I'm always curious what the jury is thinking when they're hearing that. Are they thinking, I hear what you're saying, but that doesn't really sound like what Lindsay has described. Then we talk about hormones and the problems during pregnancy. Some go up, some go down. We talk about lactation and prolactin. Reddington gets off on this whole tangent about this. He's really interested in this, about breastfeeding.
And do you think Reddington really can't understand words? Because he asked he was like, did you say males or mammals?
He does.
Can you really not hear what he's saying? But they were like completely irrelevant and were just
He does that a lot. And I'll say this. I think Reddington's a really good lawyer in a lot of ways. I don't think he handles experts very well. And we're going to see this later. Dr. La Posada's testimony, I thought, was a great example of this, where he doesn't take her through the stuff you would expect him to take her through. They're very short for experts. He doesn't spend much time with them at all. I mean, he basically gets them to say a few things that he thinks are helpful. He can't ever figure out exactly how to word the question to avoid the objection that it gets to the ultimate issue. That happens to him again today. But he talks about this stuff. They talk about hormones are going up, they're dropping off quickly, and it causes many women to have at least postpartum blues, which is sadness associated with having a baby that doesn't go to postpartum depression. Postpartum depression is a more serious condition, and it is a more rare condition. It involves things like not being able to connect to the baby, feeling isolated, no energy, insomnia. And Lindsay reported all of these symptoms. And this, again, so interesting about this case. There are some people who think Lindsay's a psychopath. She planned this whole thing. It was all a big plot to kill her kids. Maybe it was, but let's go ahead and put that aside. It seems pretty clear to me that Lindsay Clancy is suffering from postpartum depression. I just feel like that is not.
We don't need to fight that. I think it's in there, right?
Yeah. Now, the prosecution doesn't know how to handle that. It's like they don't want to admit
just
that.
Like they can't handle the fact that she may have really tried to kill herself.
Exactly.
Those two things I don't think hurt them. I think they, in a narrative, could actually very much help them, because postpartum depression, not psychosis.
Yeah.
Right? In fact, I think that gives you your motive, if anything.
And I think the prosecution's better course, if they had just been more sympathetic with everybody, including the family, maybe even including Lindsay, maybe even just saying that she has postpartum depression, that she tried to kill herself, but she has no symptoms of psychosis. She was never psychotic. And this is essentially a murder-suicide gone wrong. That's essentially what she did. The more this case goes on, the more I think that is your argument for guilt, not whatever it is they're trying to do. And I think this expert, if they keep fighting, this guy seemed reasonable. He was credible. I mean, he was a little old, but that just means he's been doing it for a long time. I feel like the jury probably thought, that guy seems like he's legit. What he's telling me, I believe. And I think she probably did have postpartum depression. And if the prosecution makes it seem like she couldn't have had postpartum depression, because that would mean she's not guilty, and she's clearly guilty. I mean, if that's the message they send to the jury, then I think they're going to lose, because I think the jury's going to believe at the end of this that she had postpartum depression. They talk about blood tests, which this related back to Tufts, and how one of the things you can test is the thyroid. This has come up several times on Reddington, because thyroid issues can happen in pregnancy and they can affect the mood, and they can cause things like the various symptoms that Lindsay was having. There were no blood tests in this case. There were no thyroid tests in this case.
So, and again, that showed up in his cross-examination earlier. So you're beginning to see how the pieces are put together in a trial. Then they talk about bipolar disorder and how bipolar disorder is classified kind of by its manic and depressive phases. So there's like 1 and 2 phases. So 1 is the most serious. 2 has similar fluctuations. Now, most people spend more time depressed than manic, and Reddington brings up working out and running as examples of Lindsay's mania.
Oh, this is really weak.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I guess he did say, like, was it this witness that they brought up that she ran 5K the day she gave birth?
Yeah, but even that, I mean.
Oh, no, I agree with that. But also, did she? I thought the whole picture of her running a 5K was, so she didn't run a 5K.
Ran a 5K.
She didn't, she
went for a run.
Right. Because later on, like 3 months postpartum, she ran a 5K race, which a lot of people do. After my first baby, when I was fit, sure, I ran the day I gave birth too. Not by my 4th baby. I barely walked up the stairs by my 4th baby. First baby, whatever, sure.
It doesn't help you to point out that she was a runner to the extent she's running on the day she gave birth, if you want to say that later 5K she ran was an example of mania.
Right.
Because it sounds like that's just something she does. Like, and the way he described mania, grandiosity, it wasn't just like you went out and ran. It's you run like a maniac for 8 hours straight and can't stop.
Right.
Like that would be something like mania.
Yeah, so I think Reddington just finds things that he thinks are like unbelievable and he gets lashed on them. But I don't think that actually helps. And then they talked about how bipolar disorder can lead to suicide, and it has to be considered here. Now, she was frequently asked if she had a plan along with her suicidal ideation. And even though she said she had suicidal ideation reported frequently, she didn't talk about a plan. Now, Gelada did consider bipolar disorder for her, but didn't reach that diagnosis. And then they further discussed the possibility of a mood stabilizer, but nothing really worked for Lindsay. Then they turned their attention to the DSM and that it does not list postpartum psychosis as a separate entity. So then they talk about other countries, and there's an objection and it gets sustained because it's really not relevant what other countries do in their diagnoses of postpartum disorders.
Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time on generalized how we handle these things, and it's relevant to a certain extent, but it's not really that relevant, particularly what they do in other countries, because once again, the only question is, what was her state of mind the day that this happened? Okay, so then we get to Cross. He's crossed on whether he really treats postpartum women or whether he mostly treats children and adolescents. And it's always interesting to hear experts answer these kind of questions, because he would say things like, when he was, at the hospital, the Massachusetts State Institute, there were women there who had postpartum issues. Like, that's kind of how he described it. But it's not like he was saying, and I treated them regularly. It seemed like he had a wide breadth of knowledge about various things, but maybe the prosecution did a little bit with, we might be overstating his quote unquote expertise in postpartum health. They noted, and this is always effective, that the reason Reddington knows about him is because of the civil suit. He is an expert in the civil suit. His information comes from the medical records that were provided to him as part of that. And he also, in his affidavit that he wrote for the civil suit, cited his facts from a New Yorker article, which is where he apparently got most of his facts. Now, he did speak to Patrick. He did not include that part in his affidavit. And obviously, there's a little bit of, given that Patrick's suing and she's suing, you can see it's a little conflicty there. You got the expert who's testifying for her. I mean, there's a little bit of an ick factor when it comes to some of the lawsuits and the lawsuit's involvement in the criminal case. So they ask, you talked about a blood test. Why would you want to have a blood test 4 or 5 months postpartum? He says you can do it to look at the level of antidepressants in the blood to see if it's too high or too low. And I thought this was a great point by the Commonwealth. She took the Zoloft for a week. How valuable is a blood test going to be if it's not pretty close to when she took it? Even if the Zoloft is still affecting her, which I am led to believe it can, it probably would not be in her system that you would observe in a blood test. So I don't know. I thought that was pretty good. And remember, I believe Dr. Tufts, they didn't even have a phlebotomist on staff. Like, they didn't do blood tests. It just wasn't part of what they did. And this goes back to sort of a thing about this. There's no, this is the universal way you do this. Step 1, you take a blood test. Step 2, you check the thyroid. Step 3, you give them Zoloft. It's not like that. You have all these different practices. They have their different approaches. And the fact that this one practice doesn't do blood tests and the other one does it, doesn't necessarily mean the one practice is bad. Some practices may do this genetic test that they have now, which apparently is pretty effective at showing what drugs would be effective. Okay, that may be great that somebody does that. Doesn't necessarily mean that every psychologist is going to. And that's one of the issues. Reddington really wants to set this up as, this is the way you do it. They didn't do it this way. Therefore, it's really their fault. They also go through the stuff with Tufts and the Zoloft. And they say, like, you said that her taking the pills, the increase is what set her off. Did you know she only took 7 pills, which he did not know? And he's like, well, that doesn't necessarily mean she didn't increase it. And they said, well, how could she have increased it if she took it for a week and then increased it? There are 7 missing. And he's like, well, maybe she only took a few. Okay, well, if that's what she did, that's also just another example of her not doing what she was told. She was supposed to take the Zoloft for 7 days, which the reason that you do it for 7 days at the low dose is for the side effects. You're making sure that you don't have side effects on Zoloft so that you can then move up. If you make it 7 days without side effects, then you can double your dose and maybe you'll have side effects, but it's less likely because we've already established that maybe you don't have that. I thought this was a weak point for him because whenever you have an expert who seems like they are changing their opinion to continue to help their client when the facts change, I think it undermines the expert. I think it's better when the experts just acknowledge, I don't know anything about that. I'm not going to guess. We're going to see this happen again with Dr. LaPosada. And then they talk about how, look, Lindsay is choosing not to go to the inpatient programs that Dukes had taught to her about going to women and infants, but she didn't go at that time. And they note that many of these medications that were listed and discussed, she was prescribed, but she never took. They talk about the Seroquel. He, at one point in his testimony, talked about her being on 400 milligrams. Fact is, she never actually got to 400 milligrams. And she requested to taper off the Seroquel. And in McLean, by the time she got there, she was already at 100 milligrams. She was down to 100 milligrams, and she got down to 0. And then they note, you keep talking about the 13 medications, but at the time of the actual murders, she's only on amitriptyline, Valium, and trazodone. Those are the only prescriptions that she was taking. And in various times throughout this, she was only on 3 or 4 medications, not 13 all at once. He called her ambivalent about Ativan, which I don't know anybody who's listened to this thinks that's true. Now, eventually she became concerned that Ativan was so helpful for her that she was becoming addicted to it, but I would not call her ambivalent about Ativan. And the Commonwealth is able to note that she never reported to any of her providers that she heard a voice. This is clearing up what Reddington said. And that the only time she said she heard a voice was on January 24th, the day of the murders. It is hard to believe, but it is back to school season. I am shocked by this. I know you are as well. My kids start school tomorrow. And I got to tell you, in addition to being concerned about what they're going to learn, there's something else that keeps me up at night as a parent. Our kids are the first generation growing up on ultra-processed foods. And what are the long-term effects? We're only beginning to understand them, but that's why Hiya exists. It gives parents a real solution in a market flooded with kids' vitamins that prioritize candy-like appeal over actual nutrition. That is not Hiya. It is packed with a blend of 12 organic fruits and vegetables plus 15 essential vitamins and minerals into every chewable. We're talking vitamin D, B12, C, zinc, folate, all the foundational nutrients that support immune health, brain function, mood regulation, concentration, and the development of strong teeth and bones.
And Hiya is NSF certified and received Clean Label Project's highest purity award. Music to a parent's ears, but here's the thing. Even if it's the best ingredients, if my kids won't eat it, it's no good to me. Well, here's the thing. You guys know I have 4 kids, sometimes a little picky on what they eat. Not when it comes to Hiya vitamins. They love it. They get their own bottles and stickers that come with it so they can personalize their own bottles. They fill it with their vitamins, and they're the ones who remind me every single day that they get to take their Hiya vitamin. What more could you ask for as a parent? And if bedtime battles and restless nights are a struggle in your house, a calming nightly chewable designed just for kids might be exactly what they need, especially when the new school year is just around the corner. Hiya's new Kids Bedtime Essentials is a total game changer. It's not a sleep aid. It's a non-habit forming chewable with L-theanine, B6, GABA, and chamomile flower extract, plus magnesium and calcium that helps kids relax before bed and wake up rejuvenated and refreshed. No synthetic hormones like melatonin, no sugar, just calm support to help them recharge for everything they've got going on. You can now find Hiya in person at Target stores nationwide or order directly from their website with a special deal we've worked out just for you. Receive 50% off your first order on any of their products. To claim this deal, you must go to hiyahealth.com/prosecute. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/prosecute and get your kids the full body support they deserve. Guys, summer is the season of ponytails, messy buns, and braids. When it's hot outside, I need my hair off my neck. I used to feel self-conscious about how my hair looked in these styles, but after using Nutrafol, I've noticed a real difference in how I feel about my hair. Instead of worrying about it, I can pull it back and get on with my day knowing it still looks healthy, full, and beautiful. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand, and it's the #1 hair growth supplement brand personally used by dermatologists. Nutrafol's hair growth supplements are peer-reviewed, NSF certified for sport, and clinically tested.
It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Nutrafol offers multiple formulas for men and women tailored to different life stages, like postpartum or menopause, and lifestyle factors such as a plant-based diet, so you get support that actually is right for you. Adding Nutrafol to your daily routine is easy. Order online, no prescription needed, with automated deliveries and free shipping to keep you on track. Plus, with a Nutrafol subscription, you can save up to 20% off and get added perks to support your hair health journey. Let your hair be one less thing to worry about. See visibly thicker, stronger, faster growing hair in 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you visit Nutrafol.com and enter promo code Prosecutors. That's Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code Prosecutors.
So then there is redirect. Reddington says that maybe Lindsay didn't tell them this out of fear. Witnesses say that they're worried her children would be taken away from her if she reported very severe symptoms. And he notes that boards of registration take a dim view if she were to express these very dark and severe thoughts, but that's just speculation. So psychosis, he then goes into, can be episodic. You can stop and start. For what it's worth, when they were talking about it being episodic, he said it was episodic. He said the rapidity of it could be like you see someone in 1 week and the next week they have it. What he doesn't say is that you're talking to someone and then it switches off as soon as they walk out the door and then switches back on, or switches off in 30 seconds when you have a phone call with them and switches back off. So even though he's getting to like the fastness of these episodes, I think there is still a timeline issue that hasn't really been addressed yet by any expert in terms of just how episodic can this psychosis be. Now, he says that SSRIs are given cautiously to bipolar people, which we've heard from multiple medical experts. But again, Lindsay has not been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Now, on recross, the Commonwealth said that this expert never interviewed the defendant. And he doesn't know what she's concerned about. He's just speculating when he's going into things that may have affected whether she reported or didn't report certain things, which is effective because it's showing the limits of his knowledge.
And honestly, we've seen that across the board. I mean, people have been doing this. Well, okay, she didn't report it. Well, she could have just been hiding it because of all these concerns. I mean, she could have been.
She could have not been too.
Here's the thing. If she was so worried about her nursing license, would she go to an inpatient therapy where she's can't leave and she's locked up for 5 days? Would she take all these different drugs? Would she go to all these people? It seems like she was willing to tell people up to a point what was going on in her life. And honestly, the only reason we think that she's not telling these doctors everything is based on what happens later and what she says later. I mean, for all we know, when she said she had suicidal ideations, but no plan, that's exactly what it was. She wasn't downplaying the homicidal thoughts in her head. She was just telling them exactly where she was. I don't know. It's hard to say, but she could have done this or she could have done that, especially from an expert. Yeah, I mean, it's complete speculation. So I thought that was a good point. Okay, the television is fixed. We fixed the TV, and now we're ready for Dr. Elizabeth La Posada, famous to some of you who follow big cases out of Massachusetts, because she is yet another Karen Reed alum, this time for the defense. She was one of the dog bite experts and one of the experts on the wounds in that case. So many of you are going to have opinions on her one way or the other. Today, she's going to testify by Zoom, and she is going to go through what she believes happened to Lindsay that caused the various physical injuries that Lindsay had. And she reviewed Lindsay's medical records and various pieces of evidence. Before we get into Lindsay, we start with the children. And, this was another just purely speculation. The kids have these bruises on them. I don't think anyone's arguing that they were beaten, but I think some of them are consistent with a struggle that probably happened while their mother was killing them. She says they're consistent with active jumping and running. I mean, okay, I guess some of them could be. Now, she's certainly right, I think, that Callan's bruising is probably the result of medical intervention. He had more medical intervention than any of them. He was barely alive, basically, when he was found. They tried very hard to save him, so that was fine. But I thought the other stuff was a little... once again, it seemed like she was speculating, and we're going to see more of that speculation. And Reddington doesn't really go into this. Could have been a strategic decision, or it could have just been sort of the way he handles these experts. She talks about Lindsay having cutting type wounds on the neck and wrist. She says that several are superficial wounds, which also makes you wonder why Reddington was so hard on people saying that she had superficial wounds earlier. Now, granted, she did have some deeper cuts, and the doctor's going to talk about that. But I think the superficial thing he did earlier actually hurts him now that his own witnesses are noting, yeah, many of the cuts were superficial. And there were some hesitation wounds. I want the prosecution to put on an expert talking about these hesitation wounds. Is it consistent with psychosis to have hesitation wounds? It's absolutely consistent with suicide. See hesitation wounds all the time. And you have someone who so efficiently kills her children, who doesn't seem to have hesitated much at all doing that. And granted, there's pain involved, I guess, when you're cutting yourself. So maybe that's the explanation. But you would think if you were psychotic, would that even affect you? I don't know the answer to that. I would love to hear an expert on it. Maybe an expert would say, yeah, totally consistent. Well, then the defense should have somebody say that. But if it's the other side, then the prosecution should probably do it. She did have significant blood loss in the bedroom, which is where the cutting event occurred.
Whew, so then they go through the fall from the window. Now, Dr. La Posada says that Lindsay would have gone out head first, and she thinks the blood transferred to the side of the building as she fell, which honestly just doesn't seem possible. And you just got to wonder if La Posada is an expert in blood spatter as well, because that's certainly not what she is qualified to talk about here. Now, she says there's a Jefferson fracture from hitting her head on, like you do in a swimming pool, like straight on, and it squashes the first vertebrae like a donut. She had fractures like that, and the injury transmitted down the vertebrae until one of the vertebrae moved over and hurt her spinal cord itself. And that's why there wasn't damage to her skull, because the spine absorbed the full shock of the fall. Then they go over the core body temperature. She said that her low core body temperature came from lying on the hard frozen ground. And she also had wet clothing on, and they were indoor clothes. She didn't have like a big jacket on, and there was no sun at the time. And so the air temp was just 30 degrees. And because she has a thin body, she had lost a lot of weight in this last month, and she's not a large person to begin with. And most importantly, the spinal injury prevented her body from being able to regulate her body temperature. And she seems to attribute most of it to, honestly, her spinal injury for causing that low core body temperature. So instead of the vessels contracting, they expand, releasing all the heat into the atmosphere.
And shout out to Reddington for asking this question, because it doesn't really matter all that much for this case. And I honestly think he did it because of all the stuff about Patrick. Because he basically has her explain one of the core tenets of the Patrick did it conspiracy, which is her low body temperature, which the conspirators think, I guess she was out there for hours that day. Like, all this happened right after the snowman, and then he just left her out there. And that's why her body temperature went down so far. And she explains exactly what happened and exactly why it happened. I thought the whole thing about the blood vessels was so interesting because your body reacts to preserve heat when you're outside, and her body's doing the exact opposite. And that is causing her to lose all of this heat that she would normally have. So shout out to Reddington. I thought, not that helpful for the actual case, but I thought it was pretty good. Now I'll say this. One thing I didn't think was good was the other part. So he's got this witness. She's trying to explain what happened. He does not walk through stuff in the way that I think would have been helpful. So the blood. The Commonwealth put on somebody who was very clearly a blood spatter expert. And she just came across so well. I just enjoyed her testimony so much as a true crime nerd, just hearing her talk about all the different things and how they happen and why they're called what they are and when they happen, the distinctions between the two. And she just was solid. You have Dr. La Posada, who it's almost just like a throwaway. Oh, well, as she's going out, the blood, that's when the blood happens. And it's like, is that really possible? But he doesn't go back and say, now let's talk about the blood. How exactly would it have happened? When would it have happened? Was it happen when she was leaning out? Could she have been leaning out for a while? Could it have not been so quick? And so she's leaning out overwards and the blood's dripping down. Could it have been that? Are you saying it happened as she passed the wall? Any of those sort of clarification questions I think would have been good. But he just doesn't really go into it. He just kind of lets it go. And once again, she's not on direct for very long at all. She basically answers these questions and then she's done, and then cross begins. And they start with the fact, which is always used against her, that she was the head of the Rhode Island Office of Medical Examiners, and it was cited for a bunch of issues, including unsafe conditions. She says they were all minor things. No big deal. She was glad they came so they could fix them. She also had 10 other violations, which she said were minimal, no big deal. Now, the prosecution doesn't go through these either. So are they minimal? I don't know. I assume if it was like you said people who were stabbed to death got shot, they would have pointed that out about how wrong she was about that. They don't. So it's sort of just left hanging. And we don't know. Now, she didn't treat Lindsay. She didn't examine Lindsay. This is true almost always of experts, but it's always the attack you use. You didn't actually look at the data. You didn't actually look at the car. You didn't actually treat her. You didn't actually, et cetera, right? That's what you do to try and weaken the testimony. She says, can't you get that fracture by hitting the back of your head or the top of your shoulders? She says, no. I assume prosecution's going to have an expert who's going to say, of course you can. Of course you can get it. It happens all the time. This is exactly how it happens. And then that expert is probably going to say, if this had happened, if she had fallen head first and hit this icy ground, then all of the prosecution's questions that follow would have happened. They say, isn't it true that she had no injuries to her head? And La Posada's like, well, I'm sure she had bruising, but she doesn't know. There's no reporting of bruising. She hasn't seen any reporting of bruising. Prosecution points it out. And once again, this is an example of the expert, rather than just answering the question and letting it go, starting to try and change or make things up or assume things to help the defendant. And I think that makes them less credible in the eyes of the jury when they do stuff like that. Prosecution says, so you're saying her head hitting the ground is what caused this. That could cause that. And La Posada walks right into it. She's like, yes, all that force and the weight of the body coming down on the head, that's what causes it. But it didn't cause the skull fracture. Didn't cause any cuts. Didn't require any sutures. There were no dents in her head. Her brain was fine. She didn't have a concussion. She didn't have any brain injuries. No cuts. No bleeding from the head. Nothing. That is what the prosecution asks. And then they show a picture of her, of Lindsay Clancy, of her head in the bed. And there is no evidence whatsoever of a head injury. And it's just one of those things where it's like, maybe that's possible, but it doesn't seem like something that you would expect to happen just in your common life experience.
But La Posada sticks by the fact that Lindsay definitely had a fall onto her head. And then the prosecution moves on from there. And this was uncomfortable for La Posada because what do experts do? They testify. And so the first thing you should do as a lawyer when you know there's a testifying expert is you look up all of their past testimonies and see what they said, see if it can help you in your case or it's something that you can cross-examine them on. And that's exactly what they did here. They pulled up some of her old testimony also about manual strangulation. So they turned to questions about the children. She said it takes 5 to 10 seconds for unconsciousness. But in a prior case, the Commonwealth said she testified in 2011. And at first she's like, I don't know what case you're talking about because they cited like the number. It was her being a little bit cheeky. And so they then got to go into the fact, oh, you know, the mother who manually strangled her daughter. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I remember that case. So in that case, she had testified that a complete compression would lead to loss of consciousness after 10 to 20 seconds. So twice as long as what she's saying in this case. But usually there's a struggle going on and it could be longer because of that struggle, which is interesting because, of course, I think we've heard some experts in this case say that the struggle may have actually shortened it. And she had testified in that other case in 2011 that it would take 2 to 3 minutes of continuous application to lead to death. So even after the children would be unconscious, it would take 2 to 3 minutes of constant pressure to then cause them to die. And La Posada does the thing that experts do best. She's like, that's a different case, totally different. She says the way the pressure was applied matters. And in that case, the prior testimony, the question wasn't about the method of strangulation. It was based on the presumption that you completely compressed the throat. So it's not clear, why it would matter here. Well, she was saying that case was a manual strangulation, so using your hands, whereas here we have a band. Both, I think, are compressing the throat. So I didn't think this was super effective for her. And she continues to stand by the fact that it would have only taken 5 to 10, maybe 20 seconds for unconsciousness in this case. But I think the prosecution did a pretty good job of pulling out her previous testimony, showing the length of time that Lindsay had to stay on their throats to cause death because all 3 children died. They were never able to be revived.
It was interesting. The prosecution managed to move her basically back to 20 seconds. And the interesting thing about the question, why I thought this was effective, you can imagine a scenario in which manual strangulation with your hands would be less effective than ligature strangulation. So you can imagine that, and that's essentially what she's saying. But that's not the question she was asked. She wasn't asked that question in that last case. She was asked if someone completely cut off circulation. So basically, you have a full, complete compression case, which is what you have here. How long would it take? And she said 10 to 20 seconds. So in the other case, she said if you have complete compression, it's 10 to 20 seconds. In this case, she's saying 5 to 10. The manual versus ligature thing doesn't really matter given the question that she was asked. I mean, you could imagine in that case, someone on cross saying, doctor, you said it would take 10 to 20 seconds with complete compression. Do you normally have complete compression with manual strangulation? No. That would be the way you attack that there. But her trying to flip it here, I don't think worked as well. Now, of course, Reddington is going to seize on that because this is what you do in good redirect. You listen to the question, you listen to the attempt by your witness to answer it, and then you give them the opportunity with a friendly question to really lay it all out, which is what they do. And they go through strangulation versus manual strangulation. And basically a ligature type strangulation would work better. and manual might be off and on. And so maybe you would be conscious for a little bit longer, different mechanism of injury, which all makes sense. I just don't think it's relevant to the question she was asked. Then we have recross. My daughter saw my notes and she's like, what's a recross? And I had to explain to her. And she's like, that's not a word. I was like, you're right. It's not a word, but it happened today. Anyway, so first we have recross. And this is an effort to just reiterate that the ligature has to be continuously applied, that it's going to take that 2 to 3 minutes of compression to lead to death. Even if you had some sort of unconsciousness at 5 to 10 seconds, you're going to have to keep it up. Then we have redirect. And on redirect, Reddington basically gets her to say that, well, maybe it was just tied around the kid's throat and left. So maybe she just tied the bands around their throat and left. Prosecution has none of this. They get back up on recross and note that there's no testimony or evidence that anything was tied in a knot and then left around the kid's neck. And points out that it seems absurd that you would just wrap it around their throat and leave them. The prosecution at this point uses the opportunity to get those bands back out, show that that's not going to work, in sort of a physical demonstration to La Posada, which I thought was really effective and is consistent with the evidence. If you recall, Patrick tells us how the bands were found around their throat. They were not wrapped around and tied up in a knot tight. That's not how they were. He described it as if you were tying your shoe without doing the bow tie. So you can imagine exactly how this happened. I mean, she took the thing, put it around their throat, wrapped it around, pulled it tight, like you would your shoes, one loop, and held it there until the kids passed out. And then eventually she did leave it like that, but I don't think that one tie, like you tie your shoes without doing the bow tie, I don't think anybody's going to say that that's tight enough to compress the blood vessels sufficiently for strangulation. And this is a failure by the prosecution, because if you don't know how strangulation works, you might think that's possible. But that is not what you see with strangulation. If you've ever seen autopsy photos of someone who has been strangled with a ligature, it is shocking and horrific what you see, because the indentations on their throats are dramatic, because it has to be really, really tight. There has to be a lot of pressure to cut off that blood in those massive arteries, which is what you're having to do. You know, you think of it as they can't breathe and that's part of it, but really the blood is cut off. La Posada described it as like, you know, tying off a pipe. The blood can't get up to the brain. The oxygenated blood cannot get to the brain. And so your brain is dying. And the amount of pressure that you have to put on someone's throat to do that is immense. It simply is not possible that she just tied even a tight knot, which there was no knot, but even a tight knot around these kids' throats and left them. That's just not what happened.
And what I think of, and you could kind of see it when they did the physical demonstration with the exercise bands, is think about an exercise band. It's elastic. And so you have to readjust your hands, because when you pull it out in order to get a better grip, you come closer to the middle, right? This is not even like a rope that has no give. And I think about that because you do. Someone asked, why do we have to go through all these autopsies and the specifics of it? Because it shows your intentionality and the process of which you do it. So think about a rubber band. When you're trying to pull it tight, especially if someone's struggling, you actually have, because it is not a static rope, it is something that's moving. It requires you to fight back, or at least move in response to the movement of the band, which I think is something the prosecution should bring out in terms of how much you have to think. Because if you're someone who's like a robot or a zombie going through the motions because you're in the midst of psychosis, you can imagine like, I do the action and then I'm done. The kids may have been able to get away, honestly, if she was just a robot. But instead, this was something that was mobile and moving and required her to react to the actual physicality of the bands themselves. But, I don't know. I'm not the prosecution.
And I just want to highlight something you said, because I think it's really important. All those people who were like, why do we have to go through the autopsy? Why do we have to go through exactly what happened to these kids? Why do we have to put Lindsay Clancy through this? This is why. And frankly, we needed more testimony on this. We needed less Lindsay Clancy crying in the courtroom and interrupting this testimony. We needed to hear more of this. It needed to be more detailed, more thorough than it was. And you might have missed this because of all the other dramatic stuff that was going on during that testimony. But recall, it was clear from the ligature lines on Dawson's throat that he fought and it moved. So it started in one place. He was fighting and the ligature moved on his throat and created another ligature line, another furrow, exactly, where he was choked. That didn't happen from it was tied and left behind. There's no way that happened. And I don't know if we'll see more.
Also, if it were one knot, even a child could undo one knot. So we're not looking at some sort of Boy Scout knot where it was impossible to get out of. This is not like the JonBenet Ramsey case where the garrote was so tight around her neck that her hair was stuck within it, right? There was no room to put a hand in there. Guess what? That wasn't an elastic band. That was a hard rope, right? That had no give.
And the one other thing I'll say about this, if I'm the prosecution, I use this as an excuse on rebuttal to either call the medical examiner back or have a new witness and go through this, because I think they need to go through exactly what happened to those kids. It shouldn't be a question. It shouldn't be something people are left to worry about. They need to know exactly what happened. And it may not change anyone's view on whether or not she was in psychosis. But I do think if you know exactly what she had to do, it might. It might affect the way you view that. Could she have been in psychosis when she's doing this to her children for the amount of time that it would take, then gets a phone call, returns the phone call, then goes and does the rest? So I think it's all important. And I thought this was a moment for the prosecution that was a little controversial. Some people didn't like it. I thought it was absolutely necessary. They had to do this, and I thought it was effective.
I did as well.
Guys, if there's one thing you know about us, it's that we are always cooking for ourselves, but mostly for our ravenous children. That's why I'm so glad that Our Place is a sponsor. Our Place makes beautiful, high-performance kitchenware designed to make home cooking easier, simpler, and more enjoyable. Everything is designed to be multifunctional. So you're not filling your kitchen with single-use pans and appliances that only do one thing and that, frankly, you're probably never going to use again. And their cookware is made without forever chemicals and has been since day one. It's third-party tested to meet global safety standards. These products aren't just aesthetically pleasing, they genuinely perform, which is what keeps people coming back.
Okay, you guys know I cook every single night of the week. I have too many children who eat too many foods, so we cook all the time. I was a little wary about getting yet another appliance to let me down, but I was influenced. I got the Wonder Oven Pro, and oh my goodness. Honestly, it's become one of the most used appliances in my kitchen. It's an 8-in-1 that preheats 60% faster than a traditional oven, which means dinner gets done 60% faster for me, and it cooks up to 40% faster, so meals really happen quicker. It air fries, it roasts, it bakes, it toasts, it reheats, proofs, dehydrates, and broils all in one compact footprint. And every cooking surface, my favorite part, is made without forever chemicals. Just tonight, I air fried some salmon and then I made homemade fries in the Wonder Oven Pro, all in one thing, enough to feed my family of 6. Everyone loved it. The kids love the Wonder Oven Pro, and it's easy enough for them to use it. Upgrade your kitchen with Our Place today. Visit FromOurPlace.com/prosecute and use code prosecute for 10% off site-wide. That's FROMOURPLACE.com/PROSECUTE and use code prosecute for 10% off site-wide. With a 100-day trial, you can try it completely risk-free. Does anyone else feel like August is the Sunday of summer? It's the perfect time to hit reset before the autumn rush, and for me, that always starts with my wardrobe. Quince proves you don't need a crowded closet to look incredible. You just need the right pieces. Quince specializes in effortless, high-quality essentials like ultra-soft organic cotton and premium Mongolian cashmere sweaters. They're beautifully tailored, built to last, and transition seamlessly from morning meetings to dinner. Quince also has premium stretch denim starting at just $50. You heard me. And with the kind of perfect fit, structure, and weight you'd expect from a luxury designer brand, I have all of these pieces, from their washable silk to their amazing jeans, and I wear them all the time. Going out to dinner, I even wear them to court, and it makes me feel put together and also like I'm in the highest quality of clothes.
Guys, if you see me out, if you saw me at CrimeCon, if you see us in the various things we do, chances are I'm wearing one of two things. Either it's a t-shirt and probably some shorts, or I'm wearing something for Quince. Oh, I got a jacket on? That's Quince. Oh, nice button-up shirt? Quince. Oh, I got some nice pants? Quince. And you know what? It's August. It's still hot, but I'm looking forward to the winter because I've got my Quince cashmere sweater. And anyone who ever grew up watching Seinfeld knows cashmere is the best, and you can get it from Quince. So what are you waiting on? Upgrade your everyday. Download the Quince app for app-exclusive offers, or go to quince.com/prosecutors. Get free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada and the UK too. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/prosecutors.
Now, the next person is someone we've heard a lot about. The next person to the stand was Paul Zeisel, the psychologist who we know saw Lindsay Clancy in the hospital and apparently has been visiting her as part of the visitor log motion that the prosecution submitted. Now, he says that he knows a lot about malingering. He says faking good and faking bad, as he says. Now, he reviewed a government psych test, and the opinion was that Lindsay was not faking. She's not malingering. Now, he's a forensic psychologist who practices at the intersection of mental health and law. He's been involved in 1,000 cases, which is a lot. I just have to say, that's a lot of cases for any expert to be a part of. And he's testified on both sides. This is something that you want to point out because you want to show someone's not just a defense hack or a prosecution hack. And for what it's worth, when I hear someone say that they've been part of like 1,000 legal cases, I think you're not a clinician then. You're just a professional expert. So take it for what it's worth. At some point, you become just the testifying expert. And he said these days he's mostly testifying for defendants, but he has testified on both sides. And he's qualified everywhere but Nantucket.
Need to get this man a Nantucket.
I was going to say, I guess Nantucket is just really hometown in him.
Nantucket's such a nice place. And probably nobody ever has any kind of issues in Nantucket. They just so happy. And
no mental issues. And
no mental issues in Nantucket.
No depression whatsoever over there.
I like this guy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's like Reddington's bud. So he's
literally. I don't know why they talked about that.
I don't either.
I was like, is this? I think
maybe they figured the prosecution would bring it up.
Yeah, it was really. He's like, and I hired you because we're friends, right? I guess maybe it was to take the sting out of it. But Reddington hires him after Lindsay tries to end her own life. And so he heads up to go see Lindsay at the hospital. On February 4th was when he saw her, which was about 11 days after the murders. He testified as to why Reddington sent him, which is a little bit weird, but whatever. He says that the troopers were there and they're guarding her, but they're in plain clothes and that there's a nurse in the room.
I tell you what, Reddington is obsessed with the fact that they would dare to put police officers outside of her room. And I don't get it. It just isn't hitting.
Triple murder. Like, it's nothing else. She's definitely a harm to herself.
And once again, you don't know how Patrick's going to react to that. Maybe Patrick's the kind of guy who'd show up and shoot her. You just don't know. So I don't know, but he always focuses on it. He is just all about that. Okay, so he talks about he does a mental status exam, orientation to time, place, identity, that kind of thing. She knew who she was, but she was foggy on everything else. I thought this was interesting because this was a good bit after all this happened. It's February 4th when he sees her. It's 11 days later. Recall, we had that doctor testify earlier about how before they even had taken out the ventilator, in fact, very early on, like the next day, I forget the exact date, they did the whole her writing on the chalkboard thing. And it seemed like at that time she didn't have these issues. But I don't know. It's just, he says she was foggy about stuff, but she did remember what had happened. Now, this part I thought was interesting. This was a part of the testimony that when I heard it, I was like, man, the people who don't like Lindsay Clancy are going to run with this because she's worried about Patrick. She hadn't had any contact with him.
I did think this was very... Ooh.
Didn't have any contact with him since the 24th. And the way he put it was she wanted to call him to see where they were, to see where she was with her and him.
I feel like he gave more of a motive right there than the prosecution did. Like, you right? Like, oh, get rid of the kids because our marriage is suffering. I don't think that's actually the motive, but him saying that, I was like, well, dang, it sure makes it sound like that.
It wasn't a good look. I mean, number one, regardless of why this happened, obviously your relationship is over. Like, you're not going to come back from this, right? Number one. Number two, it's just strange that is her focus, that her thought is, I want to find out where we're at, you know? I don't know.
Again, and you can microanalyze all these things. She's drugged up. She's in the hospital. A lot of trauma, maybe psychosis, all these things. But like, remember, right when she wakes up, the first thing she's communicated in writing was, do I need a lawyer? And am I broken? Not great looks, right? But then you add this in 11 days later and everyone reacts differently. But instead of reacting with, oh my God, does my husband hate me? I have to talk to him. It's, so like, where do we stand now? This is not great.
And somebody just pointed this out. I thought about this, but I'm going to give you credit anyway, person on the chat. No one so far has testified about her having some sort of overwhelming emotional reaction, questions, anything about her kids. No one has.
Oh, I don't think she's, from the testimony, I don't think she's even talked about her kids.
And I just, I think back to some of these hot car deaths where someone leaves their kids in the back of the car and their kids die. And it's a total accident, but oftentimes, accident or not, you're going to be charged with at least involuntary manslaughter, negligence, something. And the way you see those parents react, it's just crushing because they're so devastated by this horrific thing they did. Some of them take their own lives. And I realize this is a different situation, but you just don't see it. And it may be her medication that she was on. It may be lingering effects from the psychosis. It may be any number of things. I feel like people would look at this case differently if there had been a lot of recorded emotional reactions from her about what she did before the trial.
Yeah.
We've seen it in the trial. People have pointed out that when very similar things were discussed in her preliminary hearing, when there was no jury in the room, she wasn't breaking down and crying. She wasn't inconsolable. She just sat there. We're seeing it now. Convenient time to see it for the first time. May all be perfectly legitimate, perfectly sincere, but the fact that you don't see it before is a problem for her. And there may be somebody on that jury who thinks it's a problem and makes forceful arguments about it once they start having the deliberations. The deliberations in this case, they're either going to be really short or they're going to go for a while. I think they're either going to walk back there and they're just all in agreement that she had a mental disease and defect or she absolutely didn't. I think that's a possibility. I think much more likely you're going to have multiple jurors who take very strong positions and end up being the prosecutors in this case and the defense attorneys. And it's just going to turn on which side is more convincing and who's willing to give, because these little things that they're relatively minor in the grand scheme of thing, there may be somebody on the jury who really feels impacted by this. So in any event, she's worried about Patrick. So he decides, I'm going to let her call him on my phone, which I don't actually think is appropriate. He says he did it because it's a very human thing, but whatever. So they call, put him on speakerphone. He doesn't answer. They leave a message.
Like, stop for just a second. You're right. Like, medically, I know he's there to treat or evaluate Lindsay, but like inserting yourself in the middle of a very emotionally fraught and sensitive criminal situation is, I don't think, professional.
Yeah, I don't. And I think
like,
that's
I don't let any witness or anyone touch my phone, and certainly not to call a potential victim.
Yeah, potential victim. A core witness and what happened.
A core witness, right.
Yeah. But anyways, they call, they leave a message. Can you imagine if you're Patrick and you got that message? You check your voicemail. And it's
not a number you know, so you're going to check the voicemail.
Yeah. And then it's the first time you've heard from your wife since you found her in the snow and then found your 3 children. So 2 days later, on the 6th, she calls him again. He was there and they speak. And my question is, why isn't all this hearsay? Why does this doctor get to testify about the things he overheard in a conversation between Lindsay and Patrick? Because this is the way hearing the voices is going to come in. This is not the statement of a party opponent because it's being offered by Lindsay Clancy. It is not a statement made in furtherance of medical treatment. This is not something that happens in one of their discussions, though frankly, I don't know why they haven't had this discussion and he couldn't have just testified to that. It's not something that happened in the furtherance of medical treatment. This is literally he let somebody borrow his phone and he's overhearing what she said. It's not the present mental state because she's not describing her mental state at the time. She's telling Patrick what happened back on the day of the murders. It is offered for the truth of the matter asserted because it's offered to prove that she heard a voice using her own statement. It's getting that in without her having to take the stand. Now, the main reason it's not hearsay is because the prosecution didn't object. I don't know if this was dealt with in a pretrial motion type situation, but there's no obvious exception to me that should have allowed this very self-serving testimony to come in from the defendant without the defendant having to take the stand, say it on the stand, and be subject to cross-examination. But whatever, it comes in anyway, and this is what she says. First, she says that she told Patrick that she loved him, and she said that she heard a male voice telling her that she didn't have any choice, that she had to kill her children and then kill herself. And the other problem with this is he's not giving us verbatim what she said. We have what we think is verbatim what she said in her own declaration in her legal suit, her civil suit, which gives more detail to this and I actually think sounds much worse for her than this. This is just, she is commanded to kill the kids. She is commanded to kill herself. That's not what she says in the civil suit. In the civil suit, she says, kill your kids so that you can kill yourself, which is a very different statement than kill yourself to me. I expect that at some point the prosecution is going to try and introduce that statement. I don't know why they wouldn't, but I guess we'll see.
And I will say the lead up to this, because we knew that this call happened and this is where the voice was reported for the first time. I will say this doctor talking about how this was him as a human who lent his phone over because she wanted to know where the two were at is horrible for this testimony for the defense because he has shaded what she's about to say. She is worried about where they stand as a couple, as a partnership.
That's a good point.
And then she says, this voice came about. So I actually think instead of, and also, let's just say, even though this was never brought up by the prosecution, it was brought up in cross-examination by Reddington. If the allegation is Zeisel is the one who told her to say the voices, you would also see why he would be wanting to testify that she's wanting to say this is actually because she's worried about their relationship or whatnot. Either way, I don't think he's a good person to be testifying about this. First of all, it's hearsay. But also, I don't know if the jury's picking up on this, but when I heard it, I was like, oh, this doesn't sound good for Lindsay at all. It sounds like whether it's Zeisel telling her to say this or not, the reason she's saying this is because she's worried about what Patrick thinks about her.
That's a really good point because I had not even thought about that. But she survives the suicide. She's future oriented, according to the nurses. She's thinking about the future. She's thinking about what's going to happen next. She's not worried about her relationship with Patrick. She's just killed their 3 kids.
But
she's got to tell him
possibly
something.
Do? Yeah, she has to say something. She's got some splaining to do, Lucy, because that's not something you come back from.
She's a nurse who was very familiar by this point with all sorts of different psychological issues. She had Googled every single one of them. She'd been to a lot of different doctors. That's a good point. You know, this is a good bit after the murders. She's had some time to think about it. She's had some time for her mind to clear. She's now talking to him for the first time. And this is the first time we ever hear anything about voices. That's a good point. But he does say that he didn't tell her to say that, and he gave her no suggestions that she should say that. It was just what she said when she talked to Patrick.
So then he goes on to say that he has met with Lindsay Clancy more than 45 times.
It's a lot.
Wow, that's a lot.
Including throughout the trial. He was one of the people going back there.
Right. And he goes through her prior treatment. Note says she didn't get better. Her insomnia got worse with time, and she kept seeking help, and that she had many concerns. She felt numb, she felt disassociated, and she couldn't feel happy, et cetera, et cetera. We've heard this over and over. And he goes through her treatment history and says that she was, quote, turned away. Now, he says that hearing voices is part of psychosis. It's not an unusual symptom of psychosis, and that people in psychosis can still do things like drive cars and make calls, and they don't have to appear to be in psychosis. He says that you don't have to always be looking at the unicorn in the corner when you're in psychosis. So you don't always have to have crazy eyes, basically. Now, they're not done with the direct yet, but the judge breaks for the day because he realized that they've been going for more than 3 hours.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's like, whoa, it's time to go, guys.
We're in the 3:00 hour. And the funny thing about this judge, he doesn't even call for a sidebar and say, how
Can
much
we wrap
longer
this
do you
up for
have,
the day?
Reddington? Yeah. Like if Reddington's got 5 more minutes.
And usually you reach the end of a subject, right? Counsel, I'd like you to wrap this up here. Oh,
yeah.
Your Honor, I only have 3 more questions on this point, and then we can wrap for the day. That's usually
he's
what
just
happens.
No,
I gotta go.
Time's up. That's it. We're breaking. So we broke in the middle of this direct. And that's where we are at the end of day 15. Well, I do have bad news for those of you who've been enjoying these episodes. I am traveling the rest of the week. So we will not be doing any episodes after Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Y'all just going to have to wait until next week for our thoughts. We'll have, I guess, I don't know what time I'm getting home on Sunday, but it's a big Sunday night
Are you
wrap
gonna
up.
record on Sunday? You're gonna be coming from far away.
3 days of testimony. We got to knock it out.
I guess at least we could do one day.
We'll power through. Just get
All
a lot
right.
of rest.
Well, I was gonna say, let me block off the rest of Sunday.
Yeah. Maybe they won't say much. Well, 3 days. They'll be able to, really fast witnesses.
I literally put in 3 hours on Sunday.
I'll say this. I don't know how much longer he has.
That's fair.
He's speeding through these experts.
I do agree with you. He's a good defense attorney in the sense that he connects with his witnesses, who are the lay witnesses, very well. The experts, it's just, shall we say, superficial. They're incredibly superficial. He needs to go deeper. He needs to go way deeper with them because this case is made on whether she had psychosis. And he is leaving a lot on the table, I think, here.
Yeah, I think he is. And I think we need to know more. And honestly, I think Reddington has done a good job of convincing us that she had postpartum depression. He's done a good job of getting experts to lay out what happens in postpartum depression and then connecting her symptoms to postpartum depression. But when it comes to postpartum psychosis, he's having to do a little switch, and it's something we've talked about. It's not postpartum psychosis, people have this symptom, and she had that symptom, and this symptom, and she had that symptom. And another symptom, she didn't have that, but she had the 4th symptom. He can't do that. So it's more, if she had psychosis, could she still do all the things? Could she still drive a car? Could she still talk on the phone? Could she still go to parties? Could she still appear normal? And that's fine. That pushes back on a certain argument of the prosecution, but it doesn't provide the evidence of psychosis. You have to assume the psychosis and then say, if you assume the psychosis, these things don't necessarily contradict that. That's what we're doing, but we're never getting to the proof of the psychosis. And I think that's a little bit of a problem. Now, he has, as we've said, the silver bullet of a seemingly ordinary woman murdered her 3 children. What else could it be? And that's a powerful argument, but it's not really an evidentiary argument. And I don't know if, honestly, he will ever have an evidentiary argument. I think you just have to believe, and it may be true, that she would not have done this were it not for psychosis. And this is one reason I think the prosecution's kind of messed up in the way they've approached this, because they haven't given a good, believable alternative. They haven't said, and maybe they will, but they haven't said, you actually don't have to believe that, because you could believe that she had postpartum depression, which she actually has symptoms of, unlike postpartum psychosis. And she was suicidal. We know that because she told every doctor that. And she reached a point where she decided to take her own life and decided to take her kids' lives as well. And that's not enough. And that's your alternative. It's not just a happy, healthy, normal woman all of a sudden killed her 3 kids. That's not what you're seeing, which would seem to require psychosis. You're seeing someone who does have a mental illness,
but not one sufficient to meet the standard. And they've never made that argument. I don't know if they're going to make that argument. And maybe they just think that's slicing things too thinly and that no jury would ever buy that. But Reddington's rhetorical point is a powerful one if you don't have any kind of rebuttal. All right. Well, this has been fun as always. Would love to hear more from you guys. Please send us some emails. I keep thinking I'm going to read an email, but I want to read this one. And then we go for an hour and a half.
There's so many of them. I know. And they're so good. They're all so good.
Like we had one that was just a harrowing email from somebody whose mother was in the midst of psychosis, was going to kill her and her sister and her brother. And she managed to get to the phone and call her dad. And her dad was able to get home in time. And her mom ended up in a facility for a very long time, but recovered. And now they're best friends. The story she told was just horrific. I mean, that's one I'd like to read. We had one from a doctor who treats psychosis and talked a lot about psychosis. So there's a lot of stuff. Maybe one day we'll just have an episode where we read all these emails because they're great. But keep them coming because they're helpful for us.
That actually would be a nice, I don't know if it's a break from the sadness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think there's something to be said for how many of you have written in about these issues that did not lead to where Lindsay Clancy is. There is hope.
Right.
You can get better. You can find treatment. You can find help out there. And that has been a message that you guys have sent us over and over again. And I hope it's one that if you're out there struggling with this stuff, that you definitely take to heart. You can get through this. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. We're on TikTok. We're on X. We're on Facebook at The Gallery. We're on Instagram. Find us wherever you prefer to be. If you want to see us record these episodes, join Patreon for as little as $3 a month. If you want to get these episodes early and ad-free, you can get those on Patreon or Apple subscriptions. And if you like the videos, but you want to see them edited, we do those on Substack. And then, of course, you get everything we ever do eventually. It just has ads, which I know some of you hate. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate so many new people writing in and talking about how much you're enjoying this. We're glad you found the podcast. We hope that you'll stick around when this trial is over. This has been a tough one. We've been getting through it together. I know there's a lot of emotions. As we've said before, have a lot of grace with each other. A lot of people have experiences you don't know about. They come from places you can't see. And I think it's good just to always treat each other with grace as much as you can, unless it's someone saying that Patrick Clancy did it, in which case, feel free to do whatever you want. Alice, do you have anything you want to share before we sign off for today?
There are so many thoughts I have to share, except I guess this is not in reaction to what happened necessarily in court today, but something that has been percolating in my mind a lot for this. You mentioned that there are a lot of women, a lot of people who have this diagnosis who do not kill their children. And one thing, and I truly don't know how the jury will come out of this case. My thinking on this case, as I hear more in the testimony, is becoming more honed. And I will say it's very different than when we initially started this case. And it shouldn't be a surprise to you guys what I'm thinking here. But one thing I am cognizant of in terms of how this case ends up being talked about and what ultimately happens in this case is I pray this does not become a permission structure for people who are diagnosed or struggling with mental health issues to claim or be told that they've lost agency in all aspects of their lives. I don't know if that's what happened here with Lindsay Clancy. There are still experts testifying, but I see, and this is like a different side of the coin of what we've been talking about, which is like, you're not Lindsay Clancy. You can have postpartum psychosis and depression and not kill your children. But in addition to that, I'm not just saying a permission structure for those who suffer from it to say, now I can do whatever I want. But when you change the dialogue of how you talk about mental health and whether the second you have mental health issues diagnosed or struggles, that your agency has been taken away from you, I think everyone loses, not just the person who may be using it as an excuse, because I'm not saying it's necessarily that person who uses it as an excuse, but those around them who tell that person, you have no agency, you don't get to be safe around your kids, or you've lost all your ability to be a good mother or X, Y, or Z. And then children who I think could potentially be in danger if we allow this permission structure really to exist where you no longer have agency as soon as we label you with a diagnosis, because I think that takes incredible dignity away from most people who do not fall under the Lindsay Clancy umbrella. So that's not said very articulately, but it's something I've been thinking about in terms of where the dialogue and responsible dialogue of this case could end up doing a lot of damage in a way that may be kind of unforeseen consequences of mental health.
My favorite part about this podcast is when I'm like, you got anything else you want to say? And Alice always says, no, but, and then she drops some absolute brilliance, as she often does. So thank you, Alice, for that. Absolutely true. And I hope you guys were listening to that, because I think it's important. All right. Well, we'll be back not tomorrow or the next day or Friday, but we will be back soon to cover what happens in the last 3 days of this week in the Lindsay Clancy trial. I miss you guys. I can't wait to see you again. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Went great.
We have ads, but do you want me to just handle them tomorrow? Because you have to like travel tomorrow.
How many are there?
I don't know. I didn't open it. Probably a lot.
I hate to make you do the ads.
I'll do it. It's fine. I have so many. There's like 5 or 6. There's 6. I'll do them because I have to do ads for the other podcasts too.
You sure?
I got you. Boo.
So great.
We've been recording for like an hour and a half, so that's
a short one.
It is a short one, but also you have to go pack and travel across the country tomorrow. So I'll do it.
Okay, well, don't forget to stop recording. I was surprised at how many said they wanted to be prosecutors and defense attorneys.
Wow.
So that's good. They're actually, invested in the...
Do you think they're saying that to just suck up?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if they were sucking up, they would have said they all wanted to be prosecutors. But there were plenty of them who wanted to be defense attorneys. So
that's fair. That's fair.
To Pluto Phone. If you know the name of the movie you'd like to see, just stream it for free on Pluto TV, where all your blockbuster favorites are landing all summer long. Catch Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy.
Fantastic.
The Matrix Trilogy.
Welcome to the real world.
Mean Girls.
Shut up.
Titanic.
I'm the king of the world.
And so much more. For showtimes, press nothing. They're free 24/7.
That is so fetch.
On Pluto TV. Stream now. Pay never.